All right, y'all. Welcome to the show. It's Provoked with me, Scott Horton, and him, Daryl Cooper. And we're going to start off with a spot here real quick and get it out of the way for the Expat Money Summit coming up on the 10th through 12th. And this is Mikkel Thorup. He's a really good guy and traveled around the world 10 times or something. And he knows all the rules and regulations for how you can buy property in other countries, get dual citizenship, or otherwise protect your assets. And no gimmicks. This is all about how to pay your taxes and stay out of jail, but as little as possible. And the whole thing is free. And it's a real substantive thing. You'll really learn a lot. And yes, they do have some upsells, but you'll not waste your time on the free version. It's really great stuff. It's a 2-day long summit, the Expat Money Summit. And just go to expatmoneysummit.com/provoked to check it out. That is the 10th through the 12th. And then also Provoked is brought to you by the book Provoked, written by me. It was supposed to be co-authored by him, but he dropped out and I wrote it instead. But it's really good. And you'll all want to spend a lot of money on a lot of copies for all your friends and family too. Okay, so a little bit of business before we really begin the show is I wanted to say thank you to Julian Dory. He and his buddy Joey had me out to Hoboken, New Jersey, which is a real nice little town. I had only ever heard of it before because it has a funny sounding name, but it's a real place. And now I've been there and I had a really great sandwich from Lucy's Deli, and I went and hung out with Julian Dory and did his podcast for a little while. The other day they had me out there and it was a lot of fun. So I think they said it's not going to be out for a few weeks. So that's how they do it over there, I guess. I don't know, but keep your eyes out for that. And then I was on Judge Napolitano's show the other day, if anybody wants to look at that too, I guess. And then also today I interviewed Ted Snyder on my show, The Scott Horton Show, and that'll be up on my channel /Scott Horton Show here before too long. And with that, that's all the business I got. How the hell are you, Daryl Cooper, Martyr Maid?
Good. Perfect timing. I just got finished posting the link to the show, which I forgot to do. So I'm good, man. I'm recovering from my wounds from the vicious attack that was levied against me and several of my friends in Reason magazine. But I am recovering,
Yeah. Well, with that, let's go ahead and introduce one of our mutual friends here, Auron MacIntyre from The Blaze. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Doing well, guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Happy to have you here. So, first of all, on behalf of all of libertarianism, I disavow Reason magazine, as all libertarians do. Now, Jesse Walker, of course, is worthy of our respect, but I got to read their morning email about how Israel is defending themselves from Hamas every morning. And I've been tired of those guys for a long time anyway, but I'm so over them. And as you correctly characterize them on your show, Auron, they're the regime libertarians, which is a very, very small subset of the libertarian movement, just so you know. And with that out of the way, have at 'em, guys. They called you a couple of right-wing Reichists. What's the matter with you or them, after all? Anyway.
Well, Scott, I appreciate you being one of the good ones. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Most of us are Ron Paul folk. And no, you know what? I should say, too, I've always gotten along with Nick Gillespie. He's not exactly my point of view on everything, but he seems like a really good guy. But, okay, I'm done defending them now. They said that you guys are obsessed with Carl Schmitt, and Carl Schmitt wrote that Adolf Hitler can do whatever he wants, I guess. So you guys apparently have a real problem. Is that right?
Why don't you go ahead, brother? You're the main subject of the article, so.
Well, as Daryl and I were laughing about before we got started here, I don't think I've ever heard Daryl mention Carl Schmitt once in my life. They're just like, yeah, seems like a Nazi, just kind of round them all up there. By the way, it should be noted that Yoram Hazony is one of the key figures in the piece, the Jewish, nationalist, art and Jewish nationalist. Funny thing, I've interviewed everybody on the front of that piece except Carl Schmitt because that would require some necromancy. But of course I caught quite a bit of flack for having Harzoni on my show because I just talk to everybody. I want to understand what's going on. I may agree with you, I may not, but ultimately I just want to grasp the situation and have a conversation. And the fact that he got roped into this whole thing as like a dangerous Schmittian was incredibly comical. But yeah, there's a real problem with I guess we could broadly say the right at the moment. I guess if that's what we want to call it. But there's a subsection, especially some apologists, both conservative and libertarian, who decide that there's like intellectual cooties, and if you read something that someone mildly disagrees with, then ultimately you are 100% a proponent of everything that person said. So, for instance, you can't read Plato's Republic because he talked about how you have to take people's children when they're 7 years old and train them, to be good fascists. And so, therefore, anyone who referenced Plato or the Republic is obviously, de facto for stealing people's children at 7 years old and turning them into fascists. That's just how philosophy works. If you read any philosopher, you automatically agree with everything that philosopher has ever said, which is why everyone who reads Aristotle believes that everyone is a slave. That's just how reading philosophy works. That's the level of intellectual rigor we're dealing with at Reason Magazine.
Yeah. Well, and I think the point.
Wait, hang on, real quick, Scott. Hold on. Am I the only person who it sounds like a terrorist attack just took place in Auron's vicinity or something? Like there was a weird sound, and now you're kind of sounding bubbly and weird.
Oh, is there a problem with my audio? Is it still going?
Nope.
Yeah.
I don't know what you did. There you go.
Yeah, I think it went out for a minute, but I think you're back now. I think it's
Yeah, we heard everything though. It was just a little bit. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, it was
go ahead, Scott.
It was good enough though, and I think we're fixed. So, yeah, and look, the point of the piece is, in spite of the fusion project that Daryl and I are working on here, the point was to say that the two of you and a couple other associated type people, you're not just conservatives. You're to the right of conservatism. You're to, I guess, the radical right, where now the rule of law doesn't count, and you both just want to kill your enemies, I guess. Invoke Barack Obama's NDA of 2012 or NDAA of 2012 and start rounding people up and throwing them in Guantanamo Bay, which is something I don't think I've heard either of you say. I watch your show pretty regularly, Auron, and I know Daryl pretty good. We talk usually like once a week or so. And I hadn't heard so much of that. So I guess that is the question, though. And I've posed this question to Daryl before. Well, just how far to the right are you guys? Obviously, you're to the right, not just of reason, but to the right of me. But how far to the right do you go?
Well, I mean, I tell people the same thing whenever that question comes up. Is it depends on what's going on in the world. I'd love to be a libertarian again. That would be awesome. I would love to live in a world where I could be perfectly comfortable being a libertarian. But that's not the world we live in political systems and political ideas. People have this idea that principles are these things that what makes a principle is that they don't change based on any circumstance. They're like sacred, and I just don't think that that's how politics has ever worked or should work. You have to look at, it's interesting actually in the Reason piece, two of the points that they make sort of to indict Carl Schmitt. It cites his legal argument justifying the 1932 Prussian coup as so-called coup, and in 1934, the Night of the Long Knives, right, where Hitler had the leaders of the SA rounded up and many of them killed, murdered. And it says that the 1932 coup against Prussia, which basically what happened, you had the Prussian government, the parliament, was so hopelessly divided that they couldn't form a coalition. And there was no constitutional provision for that situation. And so the head of state at the time, von Papen, he stepped in and just appointed by diktat a government in Prussia to kind of keep things moving. And the Reason piece says, that this weakened the Weimar constitutional order and paved the way and provided the tools that Hitler would later use to consolidate his power. And it's like, kinda, I guess you could make that case. But there was no real constitutional order in Weimar to protect at that point. I mean, you're talking about 1932. This is Germany's being torn apart by not street fights, street running gun battles in the streets between communists and right-wing, militia groups. The Communist Party is the largest party in the country at the time, directly tied to Moscow, and everybody knows it. This isn't like a Russian collusion thing. Like they were taking orders and getting funding directly from Moscow in order to overthrow the existing German government and work them into the communist world with the rest of the conquered nations at that point. And so, Germany's in this place where most people felt, for very, very good reason, that they were facing a choice between communism. And remember, this is 1932. The bodies are still warm from the Holodomor, like just a few hundred miles to the east. People know in Germany, people know what's going on there. They know millions and millions of people have been butchered in the last 15 years. And they're facing a choice between communism or somebody who, you love the autism hands. We all do. Or somebody who is willing to sweep aside the limits of the Weimar constitutional order that reason is so in love with, as many liberals then and now always have been. When what could have prevented Hitler? If anything could have prevented it, it would have been a strong executive of the type that Schmitt was talking about that could have done something about this communist insurgency. But the people felt like they had no choice except to bring somebody in who was not going to let themselves be limited by that, you know? And the second thing that they brought up again was the Night of the Long Knives. And this is, there's this tendency among modern people to take political ideas that are perfectly, applicable to Vermont in 1952 and apply them to Germany in 1932, or apply them to ancient Rome when they're talking about Caesar or something. It's a tendency people have to apply what they know to things that are radically different. You go to 1934, the SA is 2 million. This is a 2 million man street army. Okay. In Germany, in a Weimar Republic that is forbidden from having more than 100,000 troops in its military or military police forces around the country. They have a 2 million man army of street soldiers who are openly starting to talk about maybe we need to overthrow Hitler because he's not moving fast enough. He's making compromises with some of the existing power structures and all these kind of things. And so rather than wait for that to build up and manifest, Hitler made a call. He went in and he arrested and rounded up and killed a lot of the leaders and kind of shut that down. Now, that was mass murder. No question about it. That was politically sanctioned, judicially sanctioned murder. No doubt. But again, I would like to know what Reason Magazine or all the people who would criticize what Schmitt had to say about it, what their solution would be in a situation like that. And I never get that part from them. It's just that, these things work in Vermont. They would work there,
But so your point is that Schmitt wasn't that far to the right in the first place? So their measure is not such a big deal, or what is it?
No, my point is that, when people talk about Schmitt, they want to talk about him as if he rose up through the ranks of American academia and now is a Supreme Court judge in Washington, D.C., and here's what he's doing and how it relates to the American Republic or something.
So you're just saying it's not even really applicable if somebody wants to talk about you or Auron's beliefs, that he's not really part of that discussion in the first place. I know, Auron, you were saying on your show the other day, I quote George Washington every day. What are you talking about? And they even admit in the article, right, that MacIntyre does say that current laws on the books could be applied to accomplish everything he's talking about here. This radical who wants a right-wing revolution.
The fun thing about that article is that it's written in this style. 2 or 3 paragraphs of absolute libel, complete falsehoods, complete fear-mongering, and then they have to, after every 2 to 3 paragraphs, include in some parentheses the fact that actually I don't believe any of the things that they just assigned to me, that I say specifically that actually we should be bound by the law, that ultimately Trump should be acting under the color of law, that Schmitt is bad for being a Nazi, that Nazism is bad and it's good that they lost, and I decry fascism. They have to go in and caveat that after just it's the most schizophrenic article ever. They're like lie, 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 lie. Oh, by the way, he didn't actually say any of this. Lie, 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 lie. And that's the entire article. So the funny thing about Carl Schmitt is a synthesis of Thomas Hobbes and Joseph de Maistre. And if you don't know anything about political philosophy, Thomas Hobbes is the father of classical liberalism. You have Lockean liberalism and you have Hobbesian liberalism. And these two strains go in different directions, but ultimately this is the beginning, most people recognize, of liberalism. So in its very inception, this line of thought is fundamentally liberal to its core. And when you synthesize it with something like Joseph de Maistre, what you're trying to show ultimately is, this is Schmitt's entire point.
Tell us
I'm sorry?
who
Joseph de Maistre?
Yeah.
So de Maistre was a French philosopher. Actually, he served in the Kingdom of Sardinia, but he wrote a lot. He was an arch Catholic. He spent a lot of time defending the church and its authority and these things. Very reactionary in response. He has a famous volume on the French Revolution, probably second only to either Burke or maybe Thomas Carlyle as an authority on the French Revolution. And so this is a guy who very much opposed the excesses of kind of this revolutionary liberalism that was taking hold in France. The point of both of these thinkers ultimately is to say that at some point, for the civil order to be maintained, someone has to make a decision. And whoever that person is that can make the final decision, the ultimate decision, that person is the sovereign. This is why Carl Schmitt said the sovereign is he who decides on the exception. There are constitutional systems, and for the majority of the time, the constitutional system is the one that we follow. But in moments of decision, for instance, the Romans, obviously, they had a literal office of dictator, right? You had these two consuls, and they were the ones who were elected for the year, and they could disagree, and they could have different roles. But if Rome needed one decisive force for 6 months to make a decision on what was going to happen in a dire moment, they installed a dictator. In fact, Schmitt wrote an entire book about dictatorships and the different types of dictatorships and the different levels of dictatorships and when they're appropriate and when they aren't and when they legally fit into constitutions and when they don't. And so Schmitt is just going through a well-established understanding of how constitutions and sovereignty interact. A lot of people look at Schmitt and they say, well, this is very prescriptive, right? Like this is telling you exactly how you should operate a government. I would say that most of Schmitt is descriptive. He is not explaining authoritarianism or designing authoritarianism in a way that Newton was not designing gravity. He's simply explaining the properties of how these systems work. Now, ultimately, he's part of the Nazi Party. I think most of that comes from his instinct to really just climb and ingratiate himself with power. But I'm not here to defend the man's character. I'm not saying Carl Schmitt is a deeply ethical person. He's a man you should follow. And the Reason magazine piece says, I follow his cultural teachings. Carl Schmitt didn't have cultural teachings. They made that up out of whole cloth. He's a guy who's doing political science. He's trying to lay out the way that politics works. You can disagree with him, right? You can say he's wrong about some things. I think Machiavelli was right on like 80% of politics. I think the 20% that Machiavelli was wrong about is really critical. But I'm not just going to throw Machiavelli in the trash because I disagreed with 20% of his politics. This is true of Carl Schmitt. Yeah, Nazis are evil. It's bad. I don't like the Nazis. Now, can we talk about the way that this actually works for the same reason that like von Braun can get you to the moon even if you don't agree with his politics, right? Like this is just the way the science works. If you don't like it, then argue with the science. But don't try to ascribe some ideological obsession to me when it's clearly these people who are ultimately obsessed with the specter of fascism coming back for them in the year of our Lord 2025.
I think one of the interesting things, you said Schmitt defines the sovereign as he who decides on the exception, right? In other words, decides on the time when the normal rules don't apply. And everybody immediately, right away, libertarian, non-libertarian, anybody, the first criticism that pops in anybody's head of that whole idea is, well, then there's just going to be an endless array of emergencies and exceptions that justify continuing to act unilaterally. And that's probably that's a danger. It's something to think about. The whole point, the main point that the Reason piece misses. I mean, ignoring the fact that they slander Auron for 8 paragraphs and everything. I'm talking about like the actual ideas that they're trying to talk about in the thing. Are that they're imagining, they're in this fantasy world that we don't live in that place now. How could anybody go through COVID and think that we don't already have that? We already have a sovereign that decides, you know what, this is an exception. None of the normal rules apply. None of the old norms apply. We are going to do whatever we want. And if you don't like it, we're going to send men with guns to your house to throw you in a cage or whatever they have to do. Like we're already
33. It's been like that since then here too.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about it too. It's like, who are the liberals' like biggest heroes? Lincoln, Wilson, freaking Roosevelt, Obama. Like four of the most authoritarian, sovereign presidents in the history of the country, including Obama. I mean, say what you, obviously like the administrative state, like sort of boxes in the president in various ways now, but that dude just ordered the execution of American citizens.
Hey, they love LBJ too.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they're he
say,
was a
well,
mean old racist,
Vietnam.
so they're a little
Yeah.
softer on that. But I mean, today, like a lot of these ideas, the liberal ideas, were developed to help people understand and govern themselves in a political order where elected leaders, like most government action, was either the direct result of initiative by or was under the regulation of elected leaders, right? Today, the vast majority of the government, 99% of the government, has nothing to do with the elected leaders. Elected leaders are almost frontmen for this bureaucratic state. Their job is to basically to take the heat when things go wrong. And then they get shipped out and they get to go work on a few corporate boards or, go head up an agency or something as their little reward, or they get a book tour. And then new people come in and the bureaucratic state just keeps doing what it's doing. And I mean, think about like the Chevron case in '84, Chevron versus the Natural Resources Defense Council or whatever it was. One of the biggest uh, cases that ever hit the Supreme Court, and has really like ever since then kind of really defined how the courts have treated the administrative state. Right. The idea was this: the Reagan administration's EPA had reinterpreted some laws regarding pollution regulation and so forth, and basically they made it so that plants, instead of having to individually get a stamp of approval for each type of thing they were putting out, which made it like difficult to put out upgrades for that thing, because then you had to go through the whole process again, whatever. You could just have like your factory be approved and then you could just sort of work. And so an NGO brought a case against the Reagan administration's EPA and Chevron, and this what the Supreme Court decided. Long-winded way of getting to my point here. What the Supreme Court decided has again influenced the way the administrative state has acted ever since then. Basically, what they said was, "Look, we're just judges, okay? If the law is very explicit, thou shalt not do this or thou shalt do this, then fine, you bring it to us and we're going to do that. But if it's anything other than that, if there's any vagueness or anything like that, we went to law school. Like, we're not going to tell the EPA or the experts at these agencies what they should and shouldn't be doing. So we're going to defer to them from now on if there's any amount of vagueness or uncertainty about things." And so this was a conservative court. 6 of the judges on the court at the time had been appointed by Republicans. That doesn't necessarily mean they're conservative, but it was center right, say. And it was a conservative ruling in the sense that this was the court saying, we're going to limit our own overreach or our own ability to reach into the executive branch and dictate to them what they can do. We're going to reinforce the separation of powers. What has been the effect of that for the last 30, 40 years now? The effect of it has been that more and more and more government action has been offloaded to this unaccountable bureaucracy that can do whatever it wants without even having court oversight unless things are very, very explicitly forbidden. And so this thing was meant to reinforce separation of powers, decentralized power, just has led to way more centralization of power than ever before, And so
They did finally repeal that one though, right? Didn't they finally strike that down? Or
I think it's
overturn it?
still,
They did.
yeah, they limited it. They didn't straight up strike it down,
What
but
what you're saying is that the entire American political center and establishment are all a bunch of Schmittians now. And so what damn difference does it make anyway? To Auron then, let me ask you, contrary to whatever, reason would say on your behalf, who do you look to as your most important political theorists or legal theorists about how things ought to be?
Honestly, I probably look at Bertrand de Juvenal more than I do anyone else, who was for libertarians, this is the guy that Hans Hermann Hoppe was drawing on when he wrote Democracy, the God That Failed. He's functionally, I would say, an Aristotelian in general. But the only reason to draw on Schmitt, again, is the fact that he's a modernization of two critical thinkers on the line that kind of gets us to where we're at right now. This is someone the left has been studying for a very long time. Actually, the left has been students of Schmitt for a good while now. This is accepted as good research, good university work for pretty much any left-winger who's working in the political realm. So the idea that you would look at Schmitt is in no way radical, except when you're trying to smear people with this like Nazi charge, which is the actual thing they're trying to do, right?
Mhm.
Like again, I wrote a book, The Total State. I did 10 chapters. Most of them were on different thinkers. The shortest chapter in the entire book is on Schmitt, right? Like I reference him, I talk about him. He's important to understand, but he is one of several different thinkers that I focus on. I give him the least time of anybody. If you look on my YouTube channel, I've done a few videos on him, but he's dwarfed by several other thinkers, including de Maistre and Auron MacIntyre and all kinds of other people that the left would probably find far more approachable. But it's a lot easier to yell Nazi, 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 rather than to just say, this guy is putting several pieces together of the reason we're in the modern situation you're in, and Schmitt simply has one of these critical pieces. The ultimate point that Schmitt is making is the same point that's been made from everybody from Machiavelli to Leo Strauss. I know, right? Like the arch villain of many. That ultimately there are moments where you have a crisis. And in those moments of crisis, no constitution can meet every one of the things. No matter how well crafted a constitution is, it cannot assume every possible outcome that can happen. And in the moment, all that constitution can do is tell you who makes the decision. It can't tell you what the decision will be. It can only tell you who has the authority to make the decision. And that's how Schmitt came up with his famous formulation. You want to know who has sovereignty in a constitutional order? It's the person who can decide on the exception when the constitutional order no longer applies. Now, as Daryl has pointed out, the state of exception has been running roughshod over the American government for a long time, pretending that we have not existed in a state of Schmittian exception for decades at this point is ridiculous. Now, you don't have to agree with the Schmittian exception to say, that's what that is. I recognize the thing. They're doing the thing that's not good. So if you don't like the Schmittian exception, still having a grasp on the Schmittian exception helps you identify what's going on here. You're not in a democracy. You're not in a republic. You're not in a representative government. There's a perpetual state of the exception going on, which is allowing this extension of government. You could approve of that. You could hate that. It doesn't matter. The point is, this is the tool that allows you to diagnose the problem. If you don't have the framework to grasp the issues, then you can't see what the problem is or if it's even a problem at all. And that's what they're trying to do. They're just like, if you notice that we're in the state of exception, then you might be challenging the orthodoxy of the regime that we prop up. And make no mistake, that's what Reason is doing. They are propping up a regime that they serve. So they don't want you to notice that you live in a state of exception, because if you do, then all of their Lolbert bromides don't work. Oh, I care about the rules. Cool. The rules have been out the window for 50 years. What do we do now? They don't want to talk about that. They just want to pretend we're living in a state that we don't have.
And which is funny, because if you ask any libertarian, including at Reason Magazine or Cato or anywhere, what happened in 1933, they'll tell you the Constitution up and died in 1933 when President for life, Roosevelt, took over and then took us to war, nationalized the economy, and created the world empire. So all libertarians know that. So yeah, state of exception. That's what, how many different national emergencies are we under right now? Probably thousands since then,
Yeah.
And so, during the days of W. Bush, and I think this is the real problem with, at least some kind of spins on this thinking, is when September 11th happens, then Bush says, I can make the exception and legalize torture and order people to torture, when in fact, the law already did account for emergencies and torture and said, no, you can't torture, even in an emergency. And so, but Mr. Sovereign gets to break the law and do whatever he wants. And then, as Al Gore would say, there's no controlling legal authority, I guess as Schmitt would say, there's no controlling legal authority to stop him. He can commit as many felonies as he wants, because that's what it means to be the president. And so, and same thing for Barack Obama with his Terror Tuesdays and all of this stuff. I mean, all of these guys break the law all the time. In fact, under the National Security Act of 1947, the president is authorized to authorize the CIA to do things from time to time, or whatever is written very broadly like that. But they can just break the law right there. Ever since the end of World War II, it's written in the law that the CIA can break the law if the president tells them to. So, yeah, that certainly seems to be where we are. And now you talk about in your great book, the total state, Auron, about the constitutional ghost dance. And that's me. I'm still completely married to this Bill of Rights. What are we going to do without this Bill of Rights? We've already lost so much of it. But when it's outright repudiated, then I don't know where the hell we're going to be then. But so what do we do? What course do we set?
So this is what I've been trying to explain to everybody, libertarians included, though I think guys like you are a little closer to, agreeing with this than obviously the people at Reason. But the critical aspect is this is a failure to understand what a constitution is. No constitution has ever been written by human hands. There is no written human constitution. That's not what constitutions are. A constitution is literally the way your people are constituted. It emanates from the folkways, the traditions, the religions, the belief of the people. The Constitution of the United States is a beautiful document, but it's not a beautiful document because it was written down. It's got the best prose, though it has amazing writing. But ultimately, the reason the Constitution was special is that it encapsulated a way of being, a way of life of a specific people at a specific time. It understood that these were the people who would be living under the Constitution. And you can have a written Constitution that jives with the actual Constitution, the way the people are living their lives, or you could have an unwritten Constitution, as many countries do, that jive with the way that they're living their lives. Or you could have a written Constitution that in no way actually reflects the way that people are living their lives, which is what we have today. Technically, we have a written Constitution, but the people in the United States are in no way following it. They are not the type of people our founders themselves said would be necessary to live in this type of constitutional republic. So if you want to restore these values, you must first restore yourselves to the state of the people who founded the country. You must live the kind of lives they lived. You must have the type of beliefs they had. You must follow their religion. You must respect the folkways. You have to embody the Constitution. It's not enough to just sit there and point at a string of words and say, I saw it on a piece of paper, therefore. Like, this is always the problem with legalism. Oh, well, I have the piece of paper I'm waving in the air. Okay, how's that working for you? Is it stopping anything? Is it doing anything? No, not because the Constitution failed or the Constitution isn't good enough. It's because the people are no longer believing in it. They're no longer animating that document with their actual lived experience. So if you want the Constitution back, it's not about writing a better Constitution. It's not about getting the framework exactly right, getting the exact legal language down, so therefore no one can get out of the Constitution. That never works. That's Schmitt's point. There will always be exceptions. And the only thing that matters in that moment is, do you agree? Do you have a shared belief? The Romans, for many, many years, had deeply held ideas about how Republican government could work. You had sacred offices, like the Tribune of the Plebs, that could not be violated because all the tribes, all the people believed in those traditions. But the minute that power was able to say, you know what, maybe I just kill the Tribune of the Plebs. Maybe I just override that veto. Maybe I just don't care if I step back from that dictatorship. It wasn't the law that was making, Cincinnatus step away from his dictatorship and return it back to the republic. It was the tradition. It was his honor. It was his beliefs that mattered. And that's what people don't grasp. The Constitution is not a piece of paper. It's not a set of laws. It's a way that you live your life. It's a belief that is encapsulated in that moment in the Constitution. And just like when the Romans lost their belief in their Constitution, they went from a republic to an empire. The minute that the United States stopped having the belief in the founding document and the founding principles, it didn't matter if the document was still there. We're no longer a republic anymore. The paper is not the thing that's making you a country. It's the people and their belief in it that matters.
Yeah, and in the Roman case and the modern case, that collapse of belief in the old ways comes as this is not something that's just entirely manufactured in left-wing academic classrooms or something. This is, or by people like Carl Schmitt. Societies grow and they change, and they have different requirements as far as their governance, and people are going to start, just to keep it to our modern case. You go back to like Roosevelt's takeover when he became president for life in 1933, right? we can look at Roosevelt. We look back now, and people looked at it then and said, "This is just it's total overreach. This is destroying the constitutional system. It's all over now." I don't know if somebody else being in office in 1933 would have made that much of a difference to those things. Maybe in details, and like maybe it would have been delayed a bit, but people were, they were living in a world where all of a sudden you could have millions and millions of people have sheriffs show up to their farm to run them off their family farm because something happened in New York on the stock exchange and something happened on the commodities exchange in Chicago, and somehow that cascades down, and now I'm losing my family farm. This is like, for most of human history, if you're going to lose your family farm, it was because some natural disaster happened. There was a famine, or there was, something real happening. All of a sudden we're in this world where people are losing their farms. There's no famine. There's no nothing. They're just, it's a financial thing that's happening in a distant place. And they look at the constitutional order and they say, this thing does not even, it doesn't begin to deal with the problems that we're facing now. And you can either make it deal with those things in a way that serves people, or you can not do that. And people are going to look elsewhere, because they have no choice. I mean, things do change. I think one of the things I wanted to bring up, Auron, is one of the many lies in that Reason piece. But they say that Schmitt, that the new right, such as it is, uses Schmitt to, let me see. He says, to justify aggressive state action against all who are designated as enemies. That's just a complete lie. First of all, like, nobody's doing that. Nobody on the new right is invoking Schmitt to justify using the state to exterminate the Untermenschen. Okay. He is invoked, to the extent he is invoked at all, by people on the right when they are talking about taking action against what amounts to this rolling color revolution that we've been living with for years and years now. We're talking about like a country where you have violent, non-state, street armies like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, who are actively collaborating with political officials, with the media corporations, with other corporations. They're getting funding from other corporations, and the bureaucracy and local law enforcement, all these kind of things, to terrorize American citizens for political reasons. You look at what happened in Kenosha. This was like, you looked at it as like a riot. It wasn't a riot. People were coming from all over the state, all over the region to go in there. And why were they doing that? Because they turned on their TV and they saw Kamala Harris saying that this innocent man who was wielding a knife at a police officer was, who just tried to kidnap his child, he was just murdered in cold blood, just like every, person that, whatever. And that, what did she say during the Minneapolis riots? That this should not stop, right? They hear that stuff. They hear that this is going on, and they're being incited to violence. They're being incited to go attack an American city, and that's actually what happened. And so when you live in a place where that's possible, where the media is inciting that, politicians at the highest level are inciting that, running cover for it, NGOs, judges are running, legal cover for these people. They refuse to prosecute them. And then somebody being chased down by a freaking child molester trying to take his gun from him, Kyle Rittenhouse, when he fires in self-defense, they try to put him in jail, And so when you live in a society where that's already happening, there's no constitution you can possibly write that is going to allow you to fix that problem. When the vice president of the United States is saying you should keep burning Minneapolis, that's what you should do. You're not going to write a constitution that's going to fix that. Somebody has to have the balls to step in and say, I'm going to put a stop to this. And the people who are causing this to happen and the people who are doing it are going to be punished so that people in the future know that they can't do this anymore. And we can say, well, but that's anti-democratic, it's anti-liberal, it's anti-American. You know what? It's probably all of those things. But America's never dealt with a situation like this before, where you have so many just high level, such organized power at the highest levels working, treating like half at least of the American population as just real enemies, as war enemies, cheering on their deaths. And it's, when people talk about Schmitt, again, this is the whole Reason magazine thing. When you go through it, is like they're talking as if it's 1777 and people want to start quoting Carl Schmitt to overthrow the constitutional order. And I just don't know what world they're living in. And that's a weird thing for me. Like, they're libertarians, allegedly, which I would think, of all people who look around and say, man, this is not anything like, the way things are supposed to be running, that it would be libertarians. But, they see that when it's convenient to see it, when they want to go after Auron and me, when they want to run cover for COVID, then, Scotty.
Mike. By the way, because this part of it is my business, I've never heard of either of these guys. I think one of them I've heard his name one time before. The other guy I've never heard of before. So they're certainly not speaking for our movement, whoever they are. But, part of what you're describing there is what they call, I guess Sam Francis coined the term anarcho-tyranny. And the thing is, a lot of that unrest is about the tyranny part. And then they're allowed to just run crazy and riot and loot. And then that's the anarcho part, is the lawlessness part. And then when you have all this pressure from below for real judicial reform, I mean, man, there's so many lousy cases of cops kicking in the wrong door, shooting somebody, shooting an unarmed guy when they don't need to, jumping in front of a car so they can say, oh, she was trying to run me over, and just crazy things. And when people demand satisfaction on that you lift the tyranny part where they fine and fee, especially poor people, to death all day. Instead, they legalize armed robbery, and they, let murderers off, pay the bail, no cash bail for violent felonies and this kind of thing, and crack down on regular people committing so-called offenses against state edicts harsher than ever. And so that's what really sucks, is because libertarians, will have this right, and even including Reason Magazine will have this right about what needs to be done. And then instead we get George Soros financed liberal and progressive prosecutors and socialists, even people who come from the, what do they call it? Not the Social Democrats USA, but the modern one, the one I mean, the AOC one. And so then they come in and, of course, just screw up everything and make people want even more law and order, which means more of the tyranny that they weren't really asking for. So that's the unfortunate part, is all the security that you guys are asking for is still a government program. And they're still going to be, cracking the protesters' skulls, but letting the looters run till 3 a.m.
I mean, we're already seeing in Portland, there's been, 2 reporters recently who have been arrested by the police for, saving an American flag, like not fighting anyone, not going to battle, not diving in and, just picking up an American flag and putting it out. And they didn't arrest the people who were assaulting the cops or burning things down or, doing violence in the streets. They arrested the reporters who were, victims of violence because they recovered American flags and did nothing wrong. Like, that's what the police are doing in this area. And, when you look at that behavior, you need an explanation for it, right? Like, I'm sorry, but rule of law obviously does not explain what's happening there. So what is happening there? Well, you see, the Portland police know who their friends are and who their enemies are. And it turns out that the most important political distinction is not the rule of law. It's not what the Constitution says. It's who the state recognizes as friend and enemy. Now, you don't have to like that. You could be a libertarian and say, I don't want the state to exist at all. But the entire point of what Schmitt was saying is that as long as the state does exist, the nature of the state will be to declare friends and enemies. And the friend coalition will be those that allow for the existence of the identity of the group, and the enemies will be those that challenge the existence of the identity of the group. And again, you don't have to like the group in question. You don't have to agree with the actions taken by the state, but it is very observably clear that he's correct about the way this dynamic plays out. The funniest thing about people attacking the friend-enemy distinction is that they are almost always attacking those who recognize the friend-enemy distinction as existential enemies. Like, they literally frame you as, oh, if you recognize the friend-enemy distinction, you're an enemy, and you're not welcome in polite society, and the state should probably snuff you out for going around and recognizing that there are friends and enemies. And this is the lie at the heart of liberalism. There are no objective institutions. There are no neutral institutions. The institutions must make decisions, and they must decide who they're going to apply their standards to and how they're going to apply it and how force is going to be applied. They have to decide all those things. Now, as a libertarian, you might say, well, the state just shouldn't exist and that solves that problem. We can have a deeper debate on that. I think that's impossible, and therefore decisions must be made. But just sitting around and pretending like the decisions aren't being made, this is why people look at libertarians and assume they're the handmaids of the left and the handmaids of the regime. Because when it's convenient, they just shut their mouths, and then the minute someone pushes back on the regime, they say, oh, well, you're asking for something ridiculous outside of the box. Well, actually, no, I'm just recognizing where we're at and the fact that we already have police who are going to arrest you for peaceably saving an American flag that's been burned and thrown on the ground, assaulting no one, but you're going to jail anyway. We're not arresting the violent people. We're not arresting the mob. We're not arresting the rioters. We're arresting you, American citizen, for trying to pick up a burning flag. Like, that's where we're at right now. I don't understand how you look at that situation. You're like, no, we're just a normal liberal democracy. That's just where we're at right now. Anybody who challenges that or notices that, they're the real problem. That's when it becomes clear you're just controlled opposition. You're just, that's all you are.
So just to clarify here a bit, because I think, again, they admitted that you have said explicitly that you want the president to follow the law, and that's it. So fine. On the other hand, though, the rest of those paragraphs are full of them at least pretending that what they thought that they heard you say was, forget the law, actually. I'm sick and tired of the left, so I want the government to just hurt them for me. That's what they thought you had said because, hey, friend-enemy distinction and exception decider and all of that. So is that or is that not what you're saying?
No, I think that everything that can be done, that needs to be done to stop the violent left, can be done under the color of law. The problem is not that there are just not laws in the books that restrict leftist violence. The problem is that we ignore them. We don't apply them to the left. We make sure that judges make sure that these people never see the inside of a jail, even if they're arrested. As where if the right is arrested, if you have January 6th protesters, they just had the guy, the trans person who wanted to kill Brett Kavanaugh, right? Just got 8 years in jail. Now, you want to compare that to the leader of the Proud Boys, who wasn't even at January 6th. He was sentenced to 22 years in jail. Several other Proud Boys were sentenced to 17 years in jail. Donald Trump was facing over 100 years in jail for the fake charges they brought to try to keep him out of the election. Now, you can disagree with the Proud Boys and Donald Trump, but if you try to murder a Supreme Court justice, I feel like you should get, I don't know, maybe as much time as a guy who wasn't even at January 6th, much less not a third of the prison sentence. We can't look at that and pretend like there isn't some kind of exception going on. So do I want there to be some extrajudicial action by Donald Trump? Do I think we need to break the Constitution in half in order to destroy the left? Not at all. All you need is a basic application of the law. Even the most basic level of equal application will destroy the leftist project. But they've been operating without any kind of actual law for at least 70 years at this point. The left just has a blank check for violence, and they've had it since the 1960s at least. So they're used to having no penalty. So the slightest amount of legal penalty under the laws we already have is like fascism for them because they've never had to pay a price for the violence that they use. The Weather Underground was trying to murder people. They were blowing up government buildings. They were planting bombs everywhere. And you have them serving as professors in colleges, celebrated mentors of presidents of the United States. Can you imagine that for Timothy McVeigh? Which, you know, we don't need to go deeper into the actual truth. But I mean,
friends, yeah.
But you get what I'm saying. Like this would not be applied to any right winger in the same way, and yet this is how our law works. So no, all we need is the actual law on the books, but we're not getting it. And so what does Carl Schmitt do? He lets us understand why we aren't getting it. That's the reason you invoke him.
Yeah, Eric Rudolph School of Medicine. Wait, hold that thought just one sec, Daryl. I got to tell him this. Buy my coffee, Scott Horton Show Coffee. Just go to scotthorton.org/coffee. I got to make a living here. And then I also want to say we got 3,000 something people watching and listening to the show right now. So please, everybody, like and subscribe and share and hit the bell and all those damn business model type things. We got to build up this show. And you guys all like it a lot. So, yes, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe. And now you were going to say something, Daryl, but also I had a question for you, which is, I wonder why you think this is happening. And I don't want to jump too quickly to the Israel thing because, you know, reason is not just simply a Zionist rag. It has not been, historically. But then again, in their morning email every morning, I got to read all about how poor little Israel is just defending themselves against the terrorists as they slaughter a Waco massacre worth of children every single day over there. And then I notice that you guys are right-wingers who don't like Israel very much. And it seems like it makes a lot of sense if I was a Hasbarist to just say all good right-wingers love Israel and the ones that don't are fascists. Because that fits in a cookie cutter. So I wonder if you think that perhaps that might be part of what's behind this smear against y'all's characters here.
I mean, maybe, yeah, I don't know. Maybe Auron has thoughts on that. I mean, I think, look, if disliking Ted Bundy makes me a fascist, then I guess, I should learn to goose step. I just, I don't apologize for, I've always, look, up until, I've always tried to be fair with Israel. There's nobody that could listen to my Fear and Loathing series and make the case that I did not do my best to try to be fair to the Zionist perspective. And I was always like that. When you go in and start massacring tens of thousands of children among a stateless people, captive stateless people with no army of their own, no Air Force, no nothing. Yeah, I'm going to have words for you. I mean, people don't like that. That's just too bad. I mean, yeah, and if it makes me a fascist, that's just fine. I don't know. Auron, do you get the sense that that's like part of the motivation behind some of this stuff?
I mean,
you don't
I don't
go that hard on Israel. You hardly even really. So
the amazing thing right now is if you look at what's happening to Megyn Kelly, right? Like, she loves Israel. She's been very clear about that. She just refuses to denounce Tucker Carlson. And because of that, and because like she noticed that like people like Charlie Kirk were kind of saying, well, I love Israel, but maybe we should be a little more careful with the way it's conducting itself. Like, all of a sudden she's getting struggle session. Like, you hate the Jews, you hate Israel, all this stuff. So it doesn't matter. You can say barely anything, which I try to in general, if for no other reason than I want to care about Israel, not at all. I would like Israel to be like Timbuktu or, Madagascar or Zimbabwe, where I just don't ever think about it at all because it just doesn't matter. It's not my country, and so I don't care about it if I don't have to. The only reason I have to care about Israel is literally if I don't spend all of my time saying, yes, everything they do is holy and we have to follow them because God said so. I get 1,000 people in my comments telling me that I hate the Jews and I want them all to die, I'm a bad Christian and all these things. And I'm just very tired of it. They just had Benjamin Netanyahu talking about the woke right and how important it was to use social media influencers to attack the woke right. Man, I wonder where he got that verbiage from. But, I don't want Benjamin Netanyahu talking about how important it is to influence our country's policy openly. I just think that if I'm going to send a guy, I don't know, $3 to $4 billion up front and then another $20 to $30 billion on the side, that maybe he could shut up and be thankful and go away. But no, instead, I have this guy openly talking about how he's dropping a pile of money on American influencers with the explicit intention of manipulating the public opinion in the United States. I just don't want that. And by the way, I don't want it for Qatar or for Russia or for Ukraine or for China or anyone else. I don't want any foreign influence in my country. And Israel is just one of the many countries I don't want to hear from about my domestic politics. That's it. But that's enough. That's all you need. If you say that, then you are, of course, a neo-Schmittian, which they just mean neo-Nazi, by which they mean we should shoot this guy. Because let's be clear, Reason Magazine is saying we should murder these people. Like, I don't want this to be like there's no equivocation on this point. Reason Magazine knows what it's doing. It's putting out a hit piece. It wants people to kill you, just like the people who are yelling Charlie Kirk is a fascist want him dead, and then they killed him. Like, that's what that means. Fascism means secular Satan in our current vocabulary. You can kill baby Hitler. He's so evil you can kill him as a baby. When he's the most innocent, he's no longer human because he's Hitler. And when they call you a fascist, that's what they're saying about you. You could be murdered. You don't have to do anything wrong. You're just in the state of being a fascist and therefore worthy of violence. That's what they mean.
Yeah, violence that is framed in entirely self-defense terms.
Right.
Yes. Like the way that these people think the murder of Charlie Kirk was actually an act of self-defense, just like killing baby Hitler was. Because Auron and me, Charlie Kirk, I mean, it is baby Hitler in a way, right? It is, according to these people's like interpretation, where if you let this thing grow, that, this is the seed. This is it seems harmless now, but if you let it grow, then this is what's going to happen. And wouldn't we all kill baby Hitler? I would not, by the way. But Auron, I want to, or I don't know, you want to talk more about the Israel angle, Scott?
Well, I just wanted to actually ask you guys if you wanted to, because time is running short here. I wanted to make sure before I forget to give you a chance to stick up for the other guys who got attacked in the piece, who they were attacked by name. And I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me right now, but in case y'all wanted to get a word in on behalf of your buddies there, I guess these are all people you said you've had on your show before, right, Auron?
Yeah, it was again Yoram Herzoni, who of course again a ardent Zionist and Israeli national, and just somebody who has noticed that liberalism has probably run its course, and we need to start looking at like actual nationalism. And people are going to have their disagreements. Again, I caught a lot of flack for having him on my channel from people on the right, the far right, who said, "How could you talk to this Zionist? He's going to sell you all the Zionist propaganda." I was like, no, I'm just going to talk to him and hear what he has to say. And I agreed with some and I disagreed with other things. And, the fact that this guy is somehow being dropped into the same, bucket and say, well, this guy obviously is a neo-Nazi because I don't know. I really, I don't even know how to.
That's the founder of the Edmund Burke Foundation thing? Okay. I know who you're talking about now, at least.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I'm trying to remember who the last person, there was one other person I think they had besides me and Daryl and Carl Schmitt in the picture, but I've suddenly forgot the lineup. But yeah, it is just wild that they have grouped all of these people together. Like, look, in many ways, I think Daryl is a bleeding heart liberal, right? Like, I disagree with Daryl on several things, but like the idea that all of us are somehow unified and are genuflecting before Carl Schmitt. Oh, it was Curtis Yarvin, right?
Right.
Right, and again, Yarvin has obviously a lot of unorthodox ideas. But the one thing that Yarvin is just never, ever, ever, ever doing is calling for state violence. Like, he has been very careful about this, right? He will talk about how a regime could change, but he only ever talks about regime change in peaceful manners. In fact, he talks repeatedly how dangerous it is to try to change it in any other way. So the idea that he is like somehow sitting there and, steepling his fingers and just waiting to pounce in the next, Reichstag fire is just ridiculous. But again, facts don't matter because Reason Magazine is just there to call you a Nazi. That's all they want to do.
Yeah. Well, look, I like this quote from Daryl. I think that's right, that you do more than anybody on TV to help set the tone for what the American conservative movement is talking about and how they feel about things, what they know about things. You do a really great show, always very deeply informed, great interviews with great guests, and I watch you all the time. YouTube knows to serve me up all the latest Auron MacIntyre every day, so no question about that.
No doubt. One of my few appointment listenings.
Yeah. All right. Any closing words, Daryl?
I mean, I could go on about that stupid article for a lot longer, but, just the main takeaway from it is just, that I really have trouble wrapping my heads around what world the reason people who wrote that article have been living in this whole time. I mean, imagine you're in like a boxing match and your opponent pulls a knife and starts slashing at you. And you somehow make it through the round and you get back to your corner and you're like, coach, he's got a knife. What should I do? He's like, well, whatever you do, don't hit him below the belt. No rabbit punching. I don't want to see any of that dirty stuff because, the integrity of we have to be better than them. The integrity of the sport is at stake here. And so you look over to their corner and you say, well, but now his cornermen are flashing a gun. Look, you just get out there and give him the old 1-2. And the coach here is Reason Magazine, of course, and all the people like them. And so you go out there and he runs at you with the knife and you drop a headbutt on him and drop him and the fight's over and you get disqualified and you lose and they award him the championship. And then the next morning you wake up and you pick up Reason Magazine and there's an article in there about just framing you entirely as the bad guy and the other guy is the victim and how, they quote the guy telling, the writers of the piece that he's just shocked and appalled that you would, that you would ever do such a thing, break the rules in such a way. Your own coach is denouncing you as a rule breaker. This isn't the way I taught him. And that's like where we're at right now. It's like I'm just going to take my sports metaphors way too far, but like, that's all I got. You're playing a soccer game and somebody comes over and just punches you in the face. And instead of coming over and giving that guy a red card and throwing him out of the game, the ref comes over and shoots you in the head. At that point, you're not playing soccer anymore. You're playing something else. There's a whole different game afoot, and you better adjust to that and start playing according to the new rules, because that's, and the reason people, again, they're living in a world that doesn't exist right now. And one of the things I would point out too about what Auron always says, he doesn't say like, let's do all this stuff because it would be awesome. He doesn't say let's do all this stuff because the Constitution and all those things were bad and stupid and all the ways we used to do things, that was always a bad idea. He says, if we ever want to get back to anything like that, we need to take some action against these things that are standing in the way of that. And we're not talking about people who have the wrong ideas about immigration or wrong ideas about anything. Actually, you can be, I think in Auron's, in mine, you can be a communist in my country. If I'm the emperor, you just can't go out and actively try to overthrow the government or, do illegal things. Like, all we're really asking for is the radical just request, please, please, state authorities, can you please just do the actual thing that your name is and exercise state authority? Can you just enforce the laws that are already on the books? Like, it seems like a pretty simple request, but it's one that is just apparently too much. And
Let me
so,
ask you, because in your boxing analogy, it sounds like you're saying it's time to start going beyond the law and win, which was, I think, contrary to the way Auron was describing his view.
it's winning and losing. When that guy brought a knife into the ring, winning and losing was no longer the relevant metric. Okay, you need to survive. Is
okay,
what
I guess what I'm asking is, so then, like, for example, some people are saying it's time to censor the left. But then again, the First Amendment would forbid that. But then again, the Democrats, when they were in power, they were sure not shy about censoring the hell out of people. So, for example, are you saying that the right-wing government should go ahead and abuse that same power because it serves them right, or not?
Well, look, when you no longer have a concept of loyal opposition amongst a large section of the population, including people who are in positions of power, then those are questions that you have to ask. Like, a lot of people watching maybe would listen to that, what you just asked, and they don't even, like, it's almost a rhetorical question. It's like, of course the answer is no. But these are discussions that have been forced on us at this point. So, like, yeah, speaking of censorship, one of the things Reason actually quotes Auron on, instead of reinterpreting and paraphrasing, he says companies like Discord need to pay a severe price for going out of their way to allow an organization of terrorist networks on their platform. And then Reason comments on this and says, ISIS propagandized, fundraised, and recruited via Facebook, Twitter, and Google. But the Supreme Court rightly ruled in Twitter versus Taamneh 2023 that the social media companies were not guilty of aiding and abetting. Quote, social media firms do not owe a duty of care to all potential victims of terrorism, even though they knew that several terrorist organizations were using their platforms to recruit new members, explains University of Florida law professor Jane Bambauer. All well and good. That would be a compelling argument if we were having a neutral, good faith argument instead of the discussion that we're actually having, which in the world that we're having it in, which is the one where, people on the right were being censored at state direction for forget about violence. Just for questioning the 2020 election.
Hey, they kicked the president off of there while he was still sitting in the presidency for another couple of weeks.
Yeah, and that's why it just seems like I feel like I'm in the twilight zone sometimes when I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody like the writers of that magazine, where it's like, if you could, like, in a vacuum, and you were to take us out of all context, we could have this discussion, and it's a worthy debate. But you have to live in the world that you're actually living in, and they're just not. And they sort of make a profession out of refusing to do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I think we better wrap. Auron, tell us about your show.
Yeah, I've got the Auron MacIntyre Show. It's, of course, on Blaze TV. You also can catch it on YouTube and Rumble and Twitter. I'm never calling it X, sorry. You can also catch it on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple and Spotify and Google and all that stuff. So check it out if you'd like.
And I have your book here somewhere on the pile, but it's buried. But it's a great book, The Total State. Oh, you got one there?
Yep.
Must
Yeah,
read.
there you go. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you both very much. Great show. Really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for watching. See you next week.